Okay, thanks everyone for being here, and welcome to episode 8 of the AEZ Boost Hackathon Workshop Series. There's been a lot of workshops for this hackathon, but since it's the first hackathon, global hackathon, I should say, dedicated to the Cosmos Hub and the Atom Economic Zone, we're very glad to have the opportunity to have such amount of robust and quality content to present to developers. Today, everyone is in for a special treat. We've got Chris and Diego with us from Agoric presenting a workshop on programmable smart contracts with hardened JavaScript. For those of you that don't know, Agoric is one of the original Cosmos chains. They've been around for a very long time now, and they know the game. And in addition to that, they've actually have some recent updates as well with their ecosystem that's growing quite quickly. We've heard of IST protocol. That's something that has been in the news lately. But overall, I think this will be a very exciting workshop for developers in the AEZ hackathon and just the audience at large who's interested in programming in JavaScript and for the Cosmos Hub, because we've got two guys with us that know it very well. So with that being said, right before I kick it over, I would just like to remind everyone that if you do have any questions, please feel free to post them right in the chat, and I'll get Chris and Diego to answer them for you. And if you're unable to do that for whatever reason, you can also feel free to reach out to me directly. My Telegram handle is @BrianDora. You can also reach out to the DoraHacks official Telegram, which is @DoraHacksOfficial, or even connect with us on Twitter or Discord and ask your questions there, and I'll make sure they get addressed here. And for everyone who's watching asynchronously in the future, same goes for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to answer anything you might have. So with that being said, thank you all for being here. Thanks everyone in the audience for being here. And Chris and Diego, please introduce yourselves, and the floor is yours to take it away.
Thank you very much. Really happy to be here. We always kind of like love the opportunity to connect with the developer audience. I know that you guys are the ones building cool things, building new stuff. So it's always interesting to kind of like share a little bit of what we know about the company, what we know about the technology, and get, build better connections. So starting, like we already said, I am Diego Lizarazo. I'm Director of Developer Relations here at Agoric, and I'm going to let Chris introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris Bennett. Happy to be here today. I work with Diego in developer relations. Spent about 20 years in IT services consulting. I got bit by the blockchain bug about 7 years ago. Dove into education, and that kind of brought me here. And really my mission in life now is just getting people excited about blockchain and Web3 and this amazing wave of transformation that's coming our way.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. I should have kind of like done something like that and also tell you about like my mission in life, which most of the time is wrangle my kids around the house, and when I'm working, also talking about developer relations, the crypto industry, Agoric, of course, in particular, and that's what we're going to be kind of like today. So I wanted to start pretty much with the agenda. So we have kind of like a relatively simple like idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start with what is Agoric, like a generic, and then we're going to be talking about Agoric architecture. And then Chris is going to be taking over a little bit on the hardened JavaScript, which is, you're going to see that is kind of like one of the important technologies that is enabling Agoric to do like a lot of the things that we want to do. So let's take it from there, and let's start obviously with the obvious thing that is like, what is Agoric? So Agoric is a layer 1 proof of stake blockchain designed to enable JavaScript developers to rapidly build safe and smart contracts. So you're going to see during the entire presentation a lot about the conversation about JavaScript and a lot of the reasons of why JavaScript from a technical standpoint. But also I think it's important that we mention that Agoric not only try to like incorporate JavaScript and use JavaScript just because of the technology, but also because of like the reach that you see in almost every aspect of modern technology, so pretty much if there is a chance to build some sort of algorithm, some sort of like program, some sort of application, there's a good chance that JavaScript can we can use JavaScript to create that version of that. And also, right now, if you're talking about like the crypto industry, you're going to see that we're usually talking about like thousands of developers. When you're talking about JavaScript developers around the world, you're talking about millions. So there is still like a huge difference between the reach of one and the other. And Agoric is well positioned to use our knowledge to help a lot of those JavaScript developers start like their Web3 like journey, So that's kind of like something that I think it's important for us to talk about. Now, let's start with JavaScript. We're going to have a similar slide to this one a little bit ahead when Chris takes over, and he's going to get into many more details. But the important thing is that JavaScript originally was not intended to do a lot of the things that Agoric needs, or that needs to be effective for Web3 developers. But it has gained a lot of those capabilities in the last decade, in the last few years, in some cases. And since Agoric is all about leveling Web3 to make it approachable to those millions of developers that I was talking about, JavaScript, it was kind of like the best bet that we had to actually kind of like reach those developers and make it like a better tech stack. And since I already mentioned that, this is the Agoric architecture. I'm going to go through some of like the stack on the left side, the red stack, and you see where Hardened JavaScript pretty much kind of like lives in the Agoric architecture. And so, well, let's talk about like that. Let's talk about like the Agoric platform, and let's take it from the top. So like you can see this layer that is called SOI. And this is a pervasive scroll layer which developers can use to manage asset exchanges. So like what SOI was created was to make certain that users get what they want, let's say an NFT, and if they don't get it, then they get their money back. And that significantly reduces the risk for developers, because they know that SOI is kind of like there in the middle to make certain that things are kind of like go as expected, regardless if there are errors or not. Then right under that, you're going to have like the digital assets that can be fungible or non-fungible. So like you as the developer are going to be the one deciding how is it that you're going to deal that. And those are going to be like the bearer rights that can be exclusively transferred or exercised. Now, after that, you're going to have Endo, that I already kind of like mentioned it when I was talking about Hardened JavaScript. But with Hardened JavaScript, everything like the programs share by default is tamper-proof. And programs can present hardened interfaces to cooperate between like each other. Now, right under that, you're going to have a Tendermint and IBC. So for everyone that doesn't know that, that's going to be inter-blockchain communication protocol that you see on the right side. And that's at the core of the technologies of the Cosmos ecosystem to enable the internet of blockchain. So pretty much like with that protocol, we are able to kind of like send messages in between different chains to make it kind of like open to have like that internet of blockchains. And if you keep kind of like listening to the things that I'm saying, you see that Agoric is all about to make everything open and accessible. So like that's also one of the reasons why you see Agoric working hand in hand with Cosmos, because we really believe in that ability to not just for a developer and for a user to just marry with one specific chain, but to be able to kind of like go where they need to go. And you could have like a chain that is quite focused on one aspect like DeFi or gaming, and still use Cosmos and IBC to have like that interoperability between like different different chains. Sorry. And in general, this is kind of like how we see from Agoric, like the process of development. So like you are going to choose a component that right now we already have an existing library that is growing and that you can visit in agoric.com/components. And then, or you can even build your own component if you think that well, we don't have like the right components for your project. And when you pick those components that are kind of like Lego pieces, you can go and build your own dApp. And then you can say like, well, this is how I'm going to do it. These are how the pieces fit together. And then you just deploy it to market. So like it's a relatively simple process, at least from the point of view of the developer, when you don't really have to worry about some of the technologies that are supporting the entire Agoric way to do things. Now, like the last part that I'm going to talk in this part of the presentation, this is kind of like a screenshot that I just took from like the developer landing page. And you can see that we are already kind of like ready to start build. So I will kind of like share some of those links at the end. So you can go and start reading about like all this part of the Agoric architecture and about hardened JavaScript and how to get your own dApps and smart contracts in the documentation. So like that is kind of like an invitation that I'm going to do now, and I'm going to do a little bit later too at the end of the presentation. And I think this is kind of like where I'm going to hand over to Chris, so he can start telling us more about hardened JavaScript and what is all about that.
You bet. I'd love to. So let me start sharing here. All right. So hardened JavaScript. Let me just kind of set the stage here. Right now, I think is such an exciting time to be getting involved in blockchain and Web3. It's still so early. And I think even for those of us who are in the space, it's very easy to underestimate or maybe even not give proper regard to the amount of change that's coming and the incredible impact that it's going to have. And that's why I think what we're doing here at Agoric is so exciting. But why hardened JavaScript? Well, JavaScript, if you're familiar with it, provides this very malleable environment for running programs and limits the amount of access that stranger's code is going to have to the underlying environment. Hardened JavaScript is this idea that if we can sacrifice some of that malleability, we can create a safer execution environment to run strangers' code in. But to really understand this, I think we kind of need to step back and just look at how technology has evolved, this evolution from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3. Early on in the Web 1 days, it was really about a one-way communication, right? Broadcasting information. This original idea of the internet was, hey, any of us can go create our own homepage and share any of our ideas out with the world. But of course, that was a one-way conversation. Web 2 came along and changed all that and made the internet interactive. Software has this long tradition of increasing interactivity as we go. We saw this begin, 70 years ago in the 1950s with mainframe terminal patterns. This expanded into client server networks, and the internet has really continued this into the modern age. And so we see over time our solutions become more and more interactive, and that's great. The more interactivity we have in our solutions, the less expensive round trips we have to make between the user and the service or the data source. But I don't think I'm saying anything new here when I say that interactivity also increases risk. And as this interactivity increases and we become more of an interactive world, we're going to need a way to be able to run programs written by strangers in a safe environment. We want to create really, really safe interactive programs while avoiding vulnerability. So to have this kind of interactive environment, we need to have a very, very safe place to run these strangers' codes. And the solution there is what we call hardened JavaScript. And I think maybe the best analogy to understand why hardened JavaScript, what this is all about, comes from a brilliant gentleman at Agoric, Chris Cowell. I can't take credit as much as I'd love to for this analogy. But if you think back to literature class, maybe you're like me and at some point you had to read the Odyssey. Well, if you remember in the Odyssey, there's one point where they're sailing and they encounter the sirens. And the sirens are these famous creatures who lure sailors in with their irresistible songs and cause their ships to crash on the shore. And so Odysseus was very curious. He wanted to hear the siren songs, but he knew there was a lot of danger. And so what did he do? Well, he told his crew, hey, stuff your ears, plug your ears so you can't hear their songs, and tie me up to the mast of the ship. So even if I'm influenced by their songs, I can't do anything. And I think this is a brilliant metaphor because it talks about, hey, we have this desire to interact with something that may be potentially dangerous, but we still want to interact with it while minimizing that risk. So how can we do that? And that's really the metaphor that hardened JavaScript tries to lay down. And I think this is, such a huge development in terms of Web3. I've worked with, literally thousands of developers across the world to understand blockchain and start writing smart contract applications. And I can tell you, this is a mistake that I made early on. It's one that I've seen so many other technical people make. We get involved in Web3 and we think, boy, the technical learning curve here is going to be very, very steep. We're working with new technology, new language, etc. I'm going to have to learn a lot. And you find when you get hands-on that this technology being so new, the technical learning curve isn't as bad as you think, but the conceptual learning curve, how you deploy it, how the types of solutions you can build, that sort of thing is very different. What I love about this hardened JavaScript model is it almost takes the technical learning curve out of the picture and lets you focus more on that conceptual. So, why do we rely on JavaScript? Well, JavaScript is used to run arbitrary programs off the internet, and there's a lot of good reasons for this. This is a language that has been designed from the beginning to run in a sandboxed environment. When we talk about web browsers, on a desktop, laptop, mobile device, etc., we're just talking about a user agent, something that's mediating interaction between programs written by largely anonymous strangers on this global network and the local resources of the execution environment. JavaScript is great because it helps mitigate a lot of these vulnerabilities when there are only two parties, right? The stranger and the user. And that's great, right? That's the Web 2 model. But we're starting to outgrow that. And we're seeing right now that, the number of practical solutions in the world where we only have two parties interacting, those are starting to become very limited. Modern web applications are this very complex mix of different conflicting motivations of users, services, advertisements, vendors, and potentially even attackers. So we have to worry a lot more about just these two classical parties. When you have three or more parties interacting together in a solution or an environment, this idea of a sandbox really becomes insufficient. If you have one stranger who can pollute the environment or damage it or do something undesirable, well, then other strangers might become vulnerable as well. We might then have strangers starting to attack each other directly at the user's expense. What happens if the service provider and the advertiser have a disagreement? You as the user or consumer are the unfortunate victim. So in these scenarios, we're going to have three or more parties interacting. What we really need is this solid foundation to build on, not just sand or something malleable that's going to give way underneath us. In this world where we can safely create interactions with more than just two parties, there's this whole new category of solutions that become possible. And we're only beginning to explore what some of those solutions look like. That's why I personally get so excited talking about this topic, why I've dedicated my career to it. We are just at the beginning of exploring an entirely new era of the web. So when you hear people talk about Web3, it's not just marketing or hyperbole. This really is the beginning of a whole new era of solutioning. So why JavaScript? Well, JavaScript was not originally intended to act as a sandbox for multiple potentially adversarial programs running all at the same time. But it's always had some very convenient properties. functions. And about a decade or so ago, it gained the last remaining property, strict mode, that it really needed to be able to safely evaluate strangers' code. So, a JavaScript program can't wander around in memory looking for pointers to objects. It wants to manipulate. It can't invoke any kind of kernel functions unless it's calling a host function. And this means that a program can be denied host functions and can be delegated these specific and, most importantly, revocable pointers to objects that we want it to be able to use. The JavaScript function can hold a powerful object in local scope, and it can use it on behalf of callers without sharing all of that power. So it's got some great properties there. The run to completion event loop model, as opposed to shared memory concurrency approaches like threads, avoids the hazard of deadlocks. If you ever had to develop in a threaded environment, what a huge concern, sometimes nightmare avoiding deadlocks can be. So this gives us the ability to ensure that, we can have functions that are called in separate events and avoid reentrancy hazards. I can tell you, if you've ever built on other Web3 platforms, dealing with these reentrancy concerns can be very, very time consuming. It can be one of the attack vectors or vulnerabilities that you're most concerned about. So being able to largely take that off of your plate is a huge step forward. Focus more on your business or application logic rather than focusing on that vulnerability. But in the end, JavaScript just wasn't ever designed or previously wasn't suitable for these co-tenant programs. Well, strict mode eliminates the most concerning features of the language, like the arguments object or with blocks. And by using strict mode, JavaScript gain the ability to harden objects, make them permanent and tamper-proof. And this is really what we rely on to create hardened JavaScript. So, imagine that you're serving up data and you want to allow clients to be able to make queries, run arbitrary or ad hoc queries on that data, but you don't want to transmit the entire data set. Well, what do? Typically what we do is we arrange for the client to send a program to the data rather than taking all the data and sending it over to the client to be processed on their end. And so typically in these scenarios, we use, hobbled or, less than Turing complete programming languages to handle this kind of interaction. So, if we're talking about a traditional centralized database world, we might be writing stored procedures in SQL, that kind of thing. In JavaScript, we might want to evaluate a query, but with these soft and malleable properties, by default, that query can receive way too much power. It can do things that we may not want it to do, like reading a database from scope or calling any method in the object of the scope, modifying mutable variables in scope, installing a thunk on the prototype of a popular method, or adding a proxy to the prototype of a global object. All things that we really, really don't want strangers coming around and doing in our environment. So in JavaScript, we run other people's programs using an eval or an evaluator. There are a few different forms of evaluators that we can use. The oldest and maybe the most dangerous, if you're familiar with it, is just the direct eval, where the program you run inherits the caller's scope. This is a dynamic scoping eval, and it can do things like introduce variables into the caller's scope. For example, this eval would happily allow bad actors to overshadow undefined in the scope of the caller. But then we have indirect evals, and these are maybe slightly less concerning, but still things that we're going to be worried about, that we want to watch out for. An indirect eval is just kind of a slight tweak of the direct eval we just talked about. It just reparents the program in global scope. The only way to invoke a direct eval is to call the eval function directly. Well, in an indirect eval, we just call the original global eval function in some non-direct way, right? So you can see here in these two examples, we can make perfectly valid statements like 2 + 2 is math and array is object, right? Statements that we know shouldn't make sense or we don't want to be able to say. And then we kind of have a third, more subtle type of eval, evals that we call subtle evals. The subtle eval is the function constructor, which compiles a program and then runs it in a closure scope parented on the global scope. And you can see in this example, we can set nan, not a number, to a number. So it's not exactly not a number anymore. You can kind of see where the problems pop up. Well, eval can be subverted in a few ways. And by doing so, bad actors can exploit this pervasive mutability of the JavaScript environment. So, the internet, the web has really benefited tremendously from this pervasive mutability that JavaScript gives. And it's this mutability that has allowed JavaScript to just explode in popularity as a language. Of course, we have shims. Shims are programs that can anticipate new features and then patch them into the global scope later. Well, if we can take this pervasive mutability and turn it in on itself, we can use it to tame and harden the runtime environment. This makes it much more suitable than it otherwise would be for multi-tenant programs. This is hardened JavaScript. Hardened JavaScript is really broken up into 3 different components or pieces or parts. First, we have the lockdown, then we have harden, and then we have compartment. So the first step of this, and we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. The first of these, lockdown, really prepares the environment. Harden defends it, and compartments help to keep it isolated. So we can use these 3 parts or 3 components together, and doing so doesn't automatically make the code you write safe. There's still due diligence on us as developers and architects, but at least we have a safe playing ground, right? At least we have a safe foundation that we can defend our code on our own with. So let's go back and let's look at these lockdown, harden, and compartment, and talk about how they all come together. So lockdown prepares the shared JavaScript primordials, objects like array or object constructors and prototypes. Lockdown also fixes some of the features that would allow programs to watch or interfere with each other. Lockdown removes any unrecognized methods from these objects. And then finally, it goes and it freezes all of the objects. Some of these objects are subtle, like prototypes for various iterators or the async function prototype, things that any program can find, but not just by visiting all the properties of the global object. So it all starts with lockdown. Then we harden. The harden function freezes an object and all of its transitive properties. So it renders its prototype and anything else reachable from the surface completely tamper-proof. Lockdown reveals the harden function, so any programs can go ahead and safely share their interfaces with strangers. And then lockdown prepares the compartment constructor. This constructor can run arbitrary programs in an environment that has a unique global this eval function and compartment constructors. And it can evaluate programs with only the capabilities that have been explicitly granted. Pretty cool. The host environment still retains access to lots of powerful objects or modules, and it can delegate these powers off to child compartments. And within a compartment, prototype pollution attacks through shared primordials are not possible. The harden function is available for programs to prevent this prototype pollution on their own objects. So all of the naughty things that we've seen happen, like assigning a number to NaN or redefining math or munging shared prototypes, we can't do anymore. A bad or malicious actor can't do. We only get what the host gave us. So to come back to our example from earlier, we can go ahead and provide a search or query function that can run these ad hoc or arbitrary queries. The application arranges to call lockdown once, and we want to do this as early as possible in the program's life. This is because lockdown itself is vulnerable to all the code that runs before it. So the higher up we can get it in the code, the better off we are. Then the application is going to arrange for a compartment for running queries. So this compartment is shared by multiple parties and it contains no modules. So we go ahead and freeze the compartment's global this. And then because we want to be able to inject individual items into the scope of a query, we capture a copy of the safe function constructor from within the compartment and use that to compile queries. Additionally, we use harden to make sure the search function and the arrays that get returned from it are also tamper-proof. And so by building queries this way, we cannot, or an attacker cannot attack the database directly. No attacker is going to have access to that database object. They're not going to be able to stage any kind of man-in-the-middle attack or exploit reentrancy by polluting the shared array prototype. They can't reach the file system. They're not going to have access to powerful modules or any other forms of ambient authority. Ambient authority is just something we talk about to describe these very powerful objects that are lying around for any part of a program to come along and use. So that's kind of a quick overview. Hopefully gives you a little bit better idea of hardened JavaScript and some of the benefits that it really introduces. Again, allows you to focus much more on the amazing wealth of possibilities that you can build when you have 3 or more parties interacting and not worry so much about what's going on underneath at a very technical level. So if any of this has gotten you curious and maybe wanting to try a little bit more, I'll turn it back over to Diego and he'll kind of talk about where you can go from here to get hands-on and continue your learning journey.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the important things here is that we invite everyone to, get their hands on. Obviously, as developers, I think that is the best way that we can learn, just getting to the documentation and trying to figure out what is it that you can do. So we have here kind of and I'm going to show you in a second. I'm going to get out of the slides and I'm going to show you directly the documentation. But you can visit the documentation and learn everything about Agoric in particular and hardened JavaScript. You can also join the community. So it's quite an active community on Discord. You have the link there and you will find it, of course, in the website. And in YouTube, in our own channel, we're constantly creating new videos and presentations that you can follow. And in the next couple of months, that's something that between Chris and myself, we're going to be creating is a full series of tutorials and samples and a lot of other content that is going to help you to learn more about that. Also, you have directly the information for Chris and for me, and then you can contact us if you have any other questions. You can also go to our Twitter channel and learn some more. But with that, I can just say that what are kind of pretty much the conclusions? Quite simple. Web3 wants more decentralization, more interactivity, make the interaction between the different systems and applications that we create more complex. And with that, we are going to have more risks. But of course, just because we're developers and that's the kind of thing that we always are aiming for, we want to have our cake and eat it. So we want to have everything that comes like with the new type of way to do things. But we don't want the risks. We don't want to make our users, we don't want to make our clients unsafe. We want to kind of like have a solid way to be able to provide everything that we kind of like had before. And of course, that is kind of like one of the promises that Agoric is making, and is like you work with us, you understand a little bit our technology, and you're going to have both ways. You're going to be able to have like a more complex system, or create dApps that are going to fill this new world in technology, without really having to risk like your users, giving you the options for you to build really safer applications. And with that, just give me 1 second. I'm going to get out here, and I promised that I was going to show the website. So pretty much this is kind of like agoric.com, and you can immediately start building. So that is what is going to take you to the documentation. And here you're going to have like the installing the Agoric SDK. That is kind of like one of the first steps. And if you want to kind of like learn more about like the JavaScript framework, you're going to have like a full section here, even some videos by Mark Miller, that was one of the creators and one of our chief developer scientists that we have at Agoric. So he clearly is going to tell you all about JavaScript, why we picked it, how we can make it secure, and everything about hardened JavaScript here too. So this is kind of like one of the best ways for you to kind of like continue learning about it. And all this information, you just can go here and find it at agoric.com. And if you want to join the community at the very end, you should be able to find us on Twitter, Discord, Telegram, etc., etc. And I think with that, I should be able to just kind of like put it here, the last slideshow, and see if we have any other questions, or just kind of like call it a day, depending on where we are.
Thanks, Diego. Thanks, Chris. There is one question, and I know you guys already covered some developer resources, which was awesome. But I think it would be great if you could explain for the audience, just more specifically, like if they're interested in programming hardened JavaScript, if they're interested in getting involved in the Agoric ecosystem as a developer, like where's the first place like they need to go just to get started?
Yeah, I think really like the getting started in the documentation is kind of like the best place. Is going to guide you through the installation process of the Agoric SDK, and also is going to kind of like start giving you like a guided path for you to learn about Agoric and hardened JavaScript. So you can use that, and specifically if you are kind of like interested in the JavaScript part of the equation, I think you should go to this section in the JavaScript framework. Then the other thing that I think it would be really important to mention, that I think it was on the slides. Give me a second. Well, it's the community Discord. Then it would be to go to the office hours. So we do have kind of like a developer office hours every Wednesday around noon Eastern time. So that's like at 9 a.m. if I'm not mistaken, Pacific time. And then we have one of our engineers kind of like asking a lot of questions in technical questions, of course, that's what I'm talking about, in case that you're having some issues following kind of like the documentation or starting your own projects. And Discord is kind of like one of the best ways there. So if you don't find like the office hours directly, you can go to Discord and start asking questions and saying like, hey, I'm stuck here, what do I do? Or just say hello and ask pretty much like the same question that you just asked, like, hey, I'm confused, I don't know where to go, can you send me a link, or can you set up like I don't know, a small conversation with me so I can get a better idea of where to go. That is kind of like also a great way to get started.
Excellent, thank you. And for anyone in the audience, I know we're gonna share this recording later on within our communities, but for anyone watching asynchronously in the future, if they have any questions, what's the best way to get in touch with yourself and Chris and the Agoric team in general?
Well, you can follow directly like the emails. We are kind of like open to answer any questions that you have there. But if you don't want to connect that way, you can go to our Twitter channel, and then we have like, well, community members that can directly or answer or guide you to us. So just go to Twitter, Agoric. Well, I'm sorry, not Twitter, X. I still kind of keep calling it the same. So X, and go to Agoric, and then you're going to find like a lot of links to these resources, or you just can directly ask like, hey, Agoric, I don't know where to get started. Can you like guide me? And someone in the team is going to respond to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I really hope that we get more opportunities to talk with the developer community. And well, again, developer relations had that part of relations for a reason. We really want to connect with all of you. So don't miss the opportunity to talk with us in any of the channels that I've been talking about, or just to kind of like say hello. Like, it's always good to know what kind of projects you are working on, and see how we can help you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it might kind of stray away from developer content a little bit, but I think something that I'm curious about and maybe would be helpful just in terms of framing like ideas and things that can be built with Hardened JavaScript and the Agoric community in general to get people like excited about developing in JavaScript and excited to become a part of your community. I know that there's been a lot of development. I know I mentioned IST protocol at the beginning of this call, but I know that's not it, right? There's a lot more recent development within specifically the Agoric, I guess, DeFi ecosystem, new projects that are getting built, things to look forward to as a community member. If you'd like to share anything related to that, I think now would be a good time too, just to get the Cosmos Hub community and hackathon participants kind of excited about like what type of use cases they can be built out, things they could be thinking about in terms of hackathon projects. Might be kind of helpful as well.
Yeah, actually, like, let me share another thing that I really like. That is the components page, and of course, of course, I kind of like I'm looking in the wrong place. I should have kind of like opened that one in validators bounty. Where do I have it? Just give me 1 second, and I'll try to look
Sure.
for it. Well, I guess worst case, I'm going to Google it. That's what happens when you don't have it open and
Yeah.
ready.
You're
So
just looking for components?
yeah, like the components page.
Yeah, it's just
Do you have it?
components.agoric.com.
Okay. Then I got it like wrong.
I think, yeah, maybe
Components.
I couldn't see. You might have just had a typo.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, correct. You got it right. Thank you, Chris.
That's
I
how we
think I
keep it
put it
secure.
as /components and not starting with components. So if you go to components.agoric.com, thank you very much, Chris, for that. You're going to be able to see something that, like I was mentioning when I was talking about the way to build Agoric dApps. So one of the things that we want to kind of like ask the help from the community and to encourage them is that you're going to have here like many components already created by the community and by some of our partners. And these are going to be some of like the Lego blocks that you're going to be able to use in your own development. So like the idea is that here we're going to have a full library in the near future. And then you could say like, hey, for example, this one that is going to be kind of like launched soon with Crya, one of our partners is going to help you to use a full NFT character builder, and you're going to do like composable NFTs. So let's say that you're thinking about something like a game character that has an armor. So well, the NFT, one NFT could represent the character itself, and another one could represent like the armor, the gun, like the power up. So things like that. And then you don't have to build that from zero. You can just take one of these components and start using. So this is also kind of like something that is really interesting. And of course, we kind of like we guide you through the entire process of like how to get started with your own components. So this is something like that we would also like to kind of like do. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of like share is that in a couple of weeks, we're going to be part of Cosmoverse that this year is going to take place in Istanbul. So we're going to be part there. So if by any chance you're in Turkey, come and talk with the team. And we're also going to have right after Cosmoverse, like a full side event that is going to be focused on just kind of like teaching you more about hardened JavaScript, about Agoric, about creating creating dApps with us. So it's going to be quite interesting, and that is something that we really want to kind of like do even more with the community. Not just like, hey, let me show you what you can do in the Web3 space. It's like, let me show you some of the things that as a JavaScript developers you could be interested in working with Agoric. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it at the moment.
Perfect. No, that's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that. So I think that about does it for the workshop, assuming that's everything you wanted to talk about. I don't see any additional questions in the chat at this time, but if you do have any, please feel free to reach out. Myself, and I'm sure Chris and Diego feel the same way, would be more than happy to help you and help you get started building in Hardened JavaScript and on Agoric in general. Please reach out if you have any questions or just interested in general and want to learn more. That's also great. But I just would like to take this time to once again say thank you to Diego and Chris for taking time out of your day to host this workshop for the participants of the AEZ Boost Hackathon. I think it's been quite valuable and a really good workshop in general. So I want to thank you both for being here and presenting very, very crucial developer content to our community. And for everyone in the audience, I want to thank you for joining as well. Hopefully you had fun learning a little bit about programming smart contracts with Hardened JavaScript and are more interested in the Agoric ecosystem now. But overall, thanks again for everyone for being here. And that does it. So I guess, Chris and Diego, unless you have anything else to say, we can conclude.
From my side, I just wanted to thank you also for the opportunity to talk with developers. It's always great when you have already like a working community and have the chance to talk with them. So yeah, like please contact us, ask any kind of questions, and we will do our best to get you guided in the inside of like the Agoric ecosystem. And apart from that, I hope to talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, Brian, I appreciate you hosting this for us, and to all the attendees, now and in the future, appreciate you guys making the time and giving us a few minutes of your attention. And yeah, we're here. We want to see you succeed. So reach out, connect with us, and let's build something great together.
That's right.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you both so much. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see y'all later.
Thank you very much, Brian.